Ukraine war. Putin confirms first nuclear weapons moved to Belarus. Russia has already stationed the first batch of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Vladimir Putin says Russia's president told a forum they would only be used if Russia's territory or state was threatened. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the West is doing everything to inflict strategic defeat on Moscow in Ukraine. The United States has made no adjustments to its nuclear posture following Russia's deployment of nuclear weapons in Belarus and denounced comments by Russian President Vladimir Putin that Moscow could theoretically use nuclear weapons if there was a threat to its territorial integrity or existence. That Washington had not changed its nuclear stance as Putin confirmed for the first time that Russia had placed nuclear arms in Belarus. We have no reason to adjust our own nuclear posture. We don't see any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon, Blinken said. Blinken said it was ironic that Putin had placed Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus when the Russian leader had justified his invasion of Ukraine on the basis that he wanted to prevent Kiev from obtaining such weapons. Speaking at Russia's annual economic forum in St. Petersburg, Putin said Russian tactical nuclear warheads had already been delivered to close ally Belarus, but stressed he saw no need for Russia to resort to nuclear weapons for now. The first nuclear warheads were delivered to the territory of Belarus, but only the first ones, the first part. But we will do this job completely by the end of the summer or by the end of the year, Putin said. The Russian leader said the deployment of the warheads, the first outside Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union, was intended as a warning to the West about arming and supporting Ukraine. The West, he said, was doing everything it could to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia in Ukraine. It is precisely as an element of deterrence so that all those who are thinking about inflicting a strategic defeat on us are not oblivious to this circumstance, Putin said. But for now, Russia had no need to resort to nuclear weapons, he said, adding that talks with the West to reduce Russia's vast nuclear arsenal were a non-starter. Nuclear weapons have been made to ensure our security in the broadest sense of the word and the existence of the Russian state, but we have no such need to use them, Putin said. Just talking about this, the potential use of nuclear weapons, lowers the nuclear threshold. We have more than NATO countries, and they want to reduce our numbers. Screw them, he said. The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank, said on Friday that Moscow's deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus is part of long-standing efforts to cement Russia's de facto military control over Belarus, but is unlikely to herald a Russian escalation. You can't fight like that for long. Striking a defiant tone on his war in Ukraine, the Russian leader said that Kiev's counteroffensive against Russian forces had no meaningful success so far, and Ukraine's forces were suffering heavy losses and would soon run out of their own military equipment, making them totally reliant on hardware supplied by the West. There's nothing left. Everything on which they fight and everything that they use is brought in from the outside. Well, you can't fight like that for long, he said. Focusing on Western-supplied armor, such as German-made Leopard tanks, Putin said they were being destroyed regularly by his forces, and if Kiev's acquired US-made F-16 fighter jets from its allies, they too would go up in flames. He also appeared to hint that Russia would target such fighter planes in locations outside Ukraine. If they will be stationed outside Ukraine and used in combat operations, we will have to look out how to engage and where to engage those assets being used in combat operations against us, he said. Targeting F-16 aircraft outside Ukraine presented a serious danger of dragging NATO further into the conflict, he added. Later on Friday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that every meter of Ukrainian territory recaptured from Russian forces was of the utmost importance during the current counteroffensive operation. Every soldier, every new step we take, every meter of Ukrainian land freed from the enemy is of utmost importance, Zelensky said in his nightly video address after meeting top military commanders. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said earlier that troops were engaged in active moves to advance in several directions at once. Along the front line and in the south, troops had advanced up to 2 kilometers or 1.3 miles in each direction. In Ukraine's east, Maliar said Russian forces were trying to dislodge Ukrainian forces from established positions, while Ukrainian forces around the devastated city of Bakhmut were trying to push Russian forces out from the outskirts of the town. Ukraine in maps. tracking the war with Russia. Ukraine has continued its counteroffensive operations and says its troops have had success on one of the front lines in the southeast, taking the village of Staromayorsky in Donetsk, about 150 kilometers or 90 miles east of city of Zaporizhzhia. And the US-based Institute for the Study of War said an intense frontal assault had also been launched towards Robotan in the Zaporizhzhia region, about 10 kilometers 6 miles south of the town of Orikhiv. Unnamed US defense officials have told American outlets that a new push has begun in the Ukrainian counteroffensive. This has not been confirmed by Ukraine, although Russian President Vladimir Putin told reporters in St. Petersburg that attacks by Ukrainian troops had significantly intensified. He insisted Ukraine had no success, adding all counteroffensive attempts were stopped and the enemy was pushed back with high casualties. But Russian-backed militia leader Alexander Khodakovsky contradicted Mr. Putin, saying Ukraine had methodically shelled Staromayorsky for several days and made gains, holding on to the outskirts and pushing on. Fighting around Bakhmut continues. Elsewhere on the front line, fighting has continued around what is left of the city of Bakhmut, which has endured some of the heaviest fighting of the war and has been under Russian control for several months. Ukrainian officials said fighting is ongoing southwest of the city near villages including Andrivka. Ukraine's counteroffensive began on a number of fronts last month but has seen very few clear gains so far. Kiev's generals have warned that fast results are almost impossible because Russia's fortified defensive lines and rows of minefields. Gen Alexander Tarnavsky says Russia's military has displayed professional qualities by preventing Ukrainian forces from advancing quickly, but added, any defense can be broken but you need patience, time, and skillful action. Cathedral destroyed in Odessa. Meanwhile, Russia has continued to target Ukraine's port and grain infrastructure, destroying a historic cathedral in Odessa in missile strike, officials have said. Russia claimed its targets in the port city were being used to prepare terrorist acts and blamed the attack on Ukrainian air defenses. Odessa head Oleg Kiper said in his Telegram channel that Russia had no attack infrastructure at Ukrainian ports of Rini and Izmail in the river Danube for 4 hours with Iranian-made drones on Monday, just across the river from NATO member Romania. Moscow has been launching near-constant attacks on Ukraine's grain infrastructure since Russia withdrew from a landmark grain deal. Officials in Ukraine say more than 60,000 tons of grain have been destroyed. The deal was struck in July 2022 between Russia and Ukraine, brokered by Turkey and the UN, allowing cargo ships to sail along a corridor in the Black Sea, 310 nautical miles long and 3 nautical miles wide. Mr. Putin says the West was not keeping its side of the bargain and has offered Russian grain to 6 African countries: Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, and Eritrea, but has been urged to renew the deal at the summit of African leaders he is hosting. More than a year of fighting. Russia's invasion began with dozens of missile strikes on cities all over Ukraine before dawn on 24 February 2022. Russian ground troops moved in quickly and within a few weeks were in control of large areas of Ukraine and had advanced to the suburbs of Kyiv. Russian forces were bombarding Kharkiv and they had taken territory in the east and south as far as Kherson and surrounded the port city of Mariupol. But they hit very strong Ukrainian resistance almost everywhere and faced serious logistical problems with poorly motivated Russian troops suffering shortages of food, water, and ammunition. Ukrainian forces were also quick to deploy Western-supplied arms such as the Enlo anti-tank system, which proved highly effective against the Russian advance. By October, the picture had changed dramatically, and having failed to take Kyiv, Russia withdrew completely from the north. More than a year since the invasion, Ukraine is now hoping its latest counteroffensive can turn the war in its favor.